Well, I was recruited to the University of Washington. I arrived in 1987, but I think the recruitment process took about a year and a half, and I had been involved. I was mid-career at that time, and I had a number of administrative duties. And so I think I was hired to rejuvenate the center at that time. So I arrived in the fall of 1987 and served as director from 87 to 95, I think. Um, and so it was an important part of my career. It's the first time I had um, been the director of a demography center. I had done interim jobs, but that's the um, first time I had done that. How did it have an impact on my career? I was very important. I had I was full of ideas, and the center faculty were ready for many of them, and so I got to implement a lot of the ideas I had at the time. And I could go into detail about those, but it was an important stage of my life. I felt that I could exercise a lot of my imagination about organizations, as well as having a venue for um, doing good research.
I was a professor in the Evans School of Public Policy, so not sociology, but my interests were in social demography. Was an expert in poverty and American social policy. So I'd heard about the Demography Center, but I didn't know much about it. And Charlie Hirschman got to the university, I believe it was 1987, as the new director. And he told me about it, invited me, and that's really what got me started. And I didn't even know there was a field called social demography at the time. So, but my work over the years really has fit into that category. And I liked it from the start because I've always been an interdisciplinary kind of guy or multidisciplinary kind of scholar. And here was a chance to work with folks in sociology, especially. And it's just intellectually very interesting. Intellectual stimulation, of course, it's hard to pinpoint exactly how that affected my work, but I'm sure it did in terms of the questions I asked and the advice I was able to get from people, and also the computing facilities. So on the research side, I know it mattered, but I couldn't give any specifics. On the other side, of course, it was just fundamental because as you know, I became director in 1997, and that became the center of my life for 5 years. And I found that challenging and interesting and sometimes tiring, but always stimulating. And being director led to me starting this population leadership program, which continued until around 2007. So the administrative side of CSD had a huge impact on my life as well. The thing I did in my career was start the population leadership program and be involved with it, because it brought in fellows from around the world, and it gave me travel opportunities around the world that I never imagined I would have, and all focused on improving reproductive health, which is a passion. I mean, I think it's passionately important, and was just so thrilled to be able to be part of that program. And I say still now, 2025, I think when I think back of my entire career, that was probably the most interesting thing I did, and the most impactful to my own person. And so.
So the offer of becoming CSDE director was part of how I was recruited to the University of Washington from Penn State. And what I realized was, essentially, without the really rapid evolution of CSDE into a fully fledged population center, a functional population center, I wouldn't have been able to obtain the independent research funding that made my career possible. So what CSDE did was they provided really key administrative and computing support that in turn allowed me to establish this interdisciplinary team of scientists focused on key questions of how epidemics spread in human populations and how they can be controlled. It turned out that answering the questions required the development of this new statistical methodology for analyzing and simulating network data. So, as they say, we were building the plane as we were flying it. And really what that required was this incredible interdisciplinary space. And that's what CSDE created, was an interdisciplinary, interdepartmental scientific environment.
In the end, I was at the University of Washington for 26 years. And I first arrived as an assistant professor, and I was a labor economist. That was what I did. I was an economist, period. And I think it took quite a few years before I started becoming associated with CSDE. And it would have been while Charlie Hirschman was the director, because Charlie put a big push on reaching out beyond the sociology department. And at the time, I had a colleague named Bob Pollock, whom I collaborated with pretty extensively over the years. And he and Charlie, I think, got talking. Bob's always been someone who is interested in the fringes of economics and sort of stretching out the kinds of things we think about. And it was really Bob who pulled me in to CSDE, who encouraged me to start going to the seminars. And I was hooked within a couple of years. And it took a while to understand that seminars outside economics are a bit different. So the habit at the time was to wait until the end of the speaker's presentation before you asked questions. And in economics, that's not the way it goes. I should note that by the time Bob and I were really closely connected to CSDE for a few years, the people who interrupted seminars first were Stu Toney and Charlie Hirschman. And so we infiltrated CSDE. And actually, I think the seminar style at CSDE evolved while I was there anyway. I'm not sure what it's like these days, but it became pretty free and easy, and with lots of sort of interruptions and questions in the middle. And I think I found going to the CSDE seminars really revelatory. Just seeing how people in other fields thought about the topics that I was interested in anyway, sort of work, health, how families operate, and so on, was really a broadening experience for me. And I think I sort of slowly moved into starting to call myself a demographer. So it changed the work that I did. It changed the literatures that I read. And it let me develop a bit of a reputation for being an economist who didn't immediately piss off all the sociologists. So you learn to be more respectful, I think, than economists had a reputation for being. So it changed me enormously. I started going to the Population Association meetings. I served on their executive committee for a while. I was vice president of the Association of Population Centers. So I really became sort of fully embedded in the demography community in a way that is the source of my warm, fuzzy feelings that I mentioned. I really felt at home in the demography community. And it's what got me my current job. And so I came to UCSB as part of a demography initiative. The dean of social sciences at the time was Melvin Oliver, a very well-known scholar of race and racial discrepancies in health. And he really wanted to build a pop center and had managed to convince a donor to agree with an endowment, right, that would both endow a professorship and a small center. And so I was responding to a search for the Leonard Broom Professor of Demography. And I think Melvin's idea was that he was going to sort of shift sociology in a more quantitative direction, but somehow it didn't turn out that way in the end. And for that, I'm very grateful. And certainly my history with CSDE and my ability to get letters of recommendation from both sociologists, demographers, and economists was what got me this job. And I've been extremely happy here. So I owe a lot to CSDE. CSDE clearly shaped my career and my research outlook in a really fundamental way.
I was recruited. I was happily employed at UCLA, but I just got married, and so I was recruitable. And I think because my wife was at the University of Toronto. So this is a personal story about tide migration, very much related to my own research interest. And we were very happy at the prospect of both of us living in LA, or even better, living in Toronto. And along came a recruitment from UW because dean, I forget the name of the dean, had pumped money into the expansion of the center. I think this is also the story for Martina, and it's certainly the story for other people at CSD at the time. The idea was to grow the center and make it more competitive in terms of applications for national money. It has been an extraordinary success. It certainly was an example of just a little bit of money goes a long way. And so there was recruitments in anthropology, sociology, and geography. It was a collaborative interdepartmental hiring initiative in which everybody really participated. And I can remember that's when I first met Bob Plotnick. He was a person I went out to dinner with. And so that was my first contact with CSDE. And everybody was working out the relationship at the time between centers and departments, as they still are. But they try to figure out, well, to what extent do departments have a say, and to what extent does the center have a say in hiring and money, all of those sorts of things. So that's my first connection. And there's a lot of other detail that goes along with it, with the hiring of my other half. And I think it was 18 months from my interview before I actually showed up here. But yeah. And my first office, because they hadn't prepared a space for me in Smith Hall, which is where geography is, my home department. My first office was in the basement of the old Savory Hall where CSD was. My first office was in the old CSD in Savory, in the basement. I'm going to try and channel the Big Lebowski here and promote brevity. It's been enormously important for me in terms of supporting my work, in terms of being a forum for my work, in terms of colleagues, support from colleagues, professional and personal, in terms of experiences, positive and negative, in terms of developing programs, understanding the institution, leading the center, understanding NIH. All of those things were so important to me. Learning how an institution works. And quite frankly, departments are quite narrow, disciplinary kind of collections of people. And the thing about being associated with CSDE is I got to meet so many smart people across campus, and it made me much less parochial in my outlook on social science. And so much so that I feel much less kind of bound to the disciplinary tradition than which I came